Folks, Jamie here with just a quick word before we begin. So, we recorded the episode you're about to hear before erstwhile Cleveland Cavaliers star LeBron James signed with the Los Angeles Lakers. And this clarification is going to make more sense later on. Okay, on with the show. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first episode of Season 4 of the Word of the Day podcast. My name is Jamie Silva, I am your host, and after a much-needed respite, I and the whole Word of the Day staff here just couldn't wait any longer. We had to get back in the RAV4 studios and start pleasantly explaining useful words to you all once again. And now, it is my distinct pleasure as we kick off this season to welcome back to the studios one of our favorite talented voice actors, Craig. Craig, great to have you here once again.
Thank you for the introduction, Jamie. Good to see you. It's been too long.
Awesome. Well, let's get to it, shall we? Today's word is an adjective, cavalier, which I would say refers to someone who pays little heed to dangers and threats. So, cavalier types generally adopt kind of a devil-may-care attitude. One might even say a YOLO-ish view of hazards, risks, and potential consequences. The word typically has a negative connotation because the people using it probably disapprove of the cavalier person's recklessness.
And here in the Bay Area, cavalier tends to have a negative connotation already, at least when it comes to basketball.
That's right. Now, cavalier also has another sense that means like generally disdainful and inattentive, but that's not the one we're going to focus on today. So instead, let's see what the online definition of our sense of cavalier looks like. Quote, showing a lack of proper concern, unquote. So I think this is all right as a starting point, but it's important to keep in mind the full range of boldness and arrogance and the air of invincibility that I think the word really implies. Like, if I really should be concerned about my high Cheeto consumption, but I just brush off those concerns, just like I do the copious amounts of orange Cheeto dust on my fingers, then yes, you could definitely say that I'm being kind of cavalier about the dangers this diet may pose to my health and or respectability.
Right. It's about more than just being unconcerned or not worried when you ought to be. If you're really being cavalier, you may well be whistling a tune as you wave off any criticism and laughing in the face of anyone who might dare suggest that you replace said Cheetos with a salad. Now, Jamie, I've been listening to your show for a while now, and cavalier reminds me a little bit of one of your previous episodes, the one featuring the word nay.
Ah, yes, Craig. I remember that show. Sure was a good one. Worth listening to again, wouldn't you say?
I mean, I don't know if it's, yeah.
Well, okay, folks, at least if you haven't heard that episode yet, it's number 48. Go back and check that out, maybe. Anyway, so, Craig, what is this parallel you were going to point out between nay and cavalier?
In that episode, you talked about naysayer, right? Which is basically an old-fashioned term for hater. Now, for the purposes of exploring cavalier, let's focus on the people who aren't at the top of the totem pole yet. They're just keeping their eyes on the prize, ignoring both the haters and the naysayers. These people believe in themselves. They're confident in their imminent achievements, and they stay focused, tuning out the criticisms and the just you wait warnings of bitter types everywhere. Despite the connotation here that the haters and naysayers are unequivocally wrong and should be ignored, I think they can actually provide something valuable. That is, pointing out some legitimate risks and obstacles that probably await you. Obstacles that, for your own good, you really ought to be realistic about.
That's a good point. And by extension, all the dreamers, those pie-in-the-sky sorts, one might say they're being pretty cavalier about these risks and obstacles. And they'd actually be better off if they just, woke up from the slumber of ignorance and smelled the coffee of potential failure.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Jamie. I mean, this just goes to show that there really are always two sides to the story and multiple ways to use and interpret most words.
Now, some might wonder whether there is any relationship between this word, cavalier, and the basketball team, the Cleveland Cavaliers.
It's a logical question, but although it's easy to leap to that conclusion, that the Cavs are so named because of their time-honored tradition of ignoring perils and laughing off skeptics, this is actually not correct. The idea for the name came from a newspaper poll conducted in 1970. The winning submission came from a fan named Jerry Tomko, who explained his suggestion this way, quote, Cavaliers represent a group of daring, fearless men whose life pact was to never surrender, no matter what the odds, unquote.
Okay, that's interesting and all, but it just raises the question, or should I say, several questions. Like, who are these daring and fearless men? Why did they have a pact? Why were they so opposed to surrendering, which is sometimes a good idea, depending on the circumstance? And most important of all, again, why was this team called the Cavaliers?
Jamie, I presume you have answers to all these questions?
Craig, I'm afraid the matter is surprisingly murky. Our staff did a bunch of research on this, right? And rather shockingly, none of the articles about the naming of the team, including on the Cavaliers website, or in a book we found entitled 100 Things Cavaliers Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die, nowhere was there an explanation of any of this stuff, from Jerry Tomko or anyone else.
Wow, that's a really sad commentary on the state of journalism today, as well as the state of the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Now, Craig, I think they've suffered enough. But yeah, it's disappointing, no doubt. You see, the way Mr. Tomko's description is phrased, it indicates that Cavaliers refers to a specific group of actual men. Men, quote, whose life pact was never surrender no matter the odds, unquote. Now, if these were fictional or hypothetical men, then you would say whose life pact is, or whose life pact would be never surrender. But instead, it's was never surrender. So, we gotta ask, what real-life historical people were called Cavaliers?
Curiouser and curiouser. Hey, well, maybe the etymology will help. The noun form of cavalier comes from this 16th century Italian word cavaliere, meaning, quote, a mounted soldier or knight, or, alternatively, a gentleman escorting a lady, unquote.
Ah, yes, and in Spanish, caballero means a gentleman. And also, in literary settings, it refers to a horseman or a knight, presumably one in shining armor. And also, a quick sidebar here about that armor. I think it must have been a major hassle back in those times to, keep one's armor all shiny and polished all the time.
I bet it was, but you probably had to polish it up, because otherwise, all the other knights would snicker at you and be like, oh look, here comes Sir Dust-a-Lot, our knight in dull and rusty armor. Better alert the damsels.
Yeah, man, armor shaming. It was a real problem.
Unrealistic standards of knighthood, you know?
Absolutely. Anyway, so we have the Spanish, caballero, and, Craig, what was the other word here, the Italian one?
Oh, you mean cavaliere.
Oh, wow. Thanks, Craig. So, both of these words come from a Latin word for horse, which was cavalus. And since people riding on horses was like the height of military technology for many, many centuries, to say that someone was a horseman evoked images of strength and weaponry, courageous attacks, and valiant defenses. And in fact, the English word cavalry referred for a long time to soldiers on horseback, which were prized for their mobility, especially in comparison to foot soldiers. And even today, despite the distinct lack of horses at modern front lines, cavalry is still a military term, referring to mobile fighting units such as tanks and armored cars. But, alas, all of this is of little help in answering our question, who are the real Cavaliers?
What if they were just talking about the Musketeers, as in the Three Musketeers from the famous novel by Alexander Dumas? I mean, look at their current mascot. He looks like a stereotypical musketeer, with a long sword and boots and gloves and fancy belt buckle, and the floppy hat with a feather in it. And I believe their team motto, sewn into the insides of their uniform collars, is all for one, one for all, which was the Three Musketeers' big catchphrase.
That's a good theory, Craig, but there are some counterpoints. First, I'm pretty sure musketeers and cavaliers are different people. I mean, it's right there in the name. Cavaliers rode horses, as we just learned, and musketeers were on foot and carried, obviously, muskets. I mean, maybe they were good with a sword, too, and liked to duel, and perhaps they held themselves to similar standards of gallantry and knighthood or whatever. But I don't think you can just equate them with cavaliers and use the terms interchangeably. Second, the actual book, The Three Musketeers, does contain the word cavalier several times, either as an adjective or in the general horseman or military gentleman sense. But the main characters, as a group, never describe themselves as cavaliers, or were labeled as such by the narrator. And lastly, the Musketeers' motto was definitely not never surrender no matter the odds. Obviously not. Again, it was all for one, one for all. So, once more, I ask, who are the real Cavaliers?
Jamie, are you telling me you want the real Cavaliers to please stand up?
Yes, I would actually, though that would be tough to accomplish, since they apparently died out a long time ago. You see, in our research, the only situation where we saw Cavaliers being used to refer to a particular group of historical people was in the 17th century, when the term was applied as an insult to supporters of King Charles I of England, who asserted his right to absolute power over the protests of Parliament.
So, did these people never surrender? Or did they ride horses? Or what?
None of the above, Craig. None of the above. See, the way opponents of King Charles used the word Cavalier, it meant like a lying, irreligious, frequently drunk person who was obsessed with fashion, liked to have a good time, and would happily subvert the nation and support King Charles to have it.
Now, Jamie, I have here in my hands a petition submitted to the British Parliament in the year 1642.
Hey,
and it lays out some
Craig,
complaints.
that's very old parchment. Please, dude, try not to crinkle it or anything.
Thanks, Jamie, but it's fine. I'm being very careful. So, this petition, which was submitted to the king, goes like this. Quote, several sorts of malignant men who were about the king under the name of Cavaliers, without having respect for the laws of the land or any fear either of God or man, were ready to commit all manner of outrage and violence. We ask that your majesty please dismiss the Cavaliers, who seem to have little interest or affection for the public good, as their language and behavior speaks nothing but division and war. Unquote. And two important notes here. Public is spelled with a K at the end, and behavior with an OU. And like every third word is capitalized. Jamie, back to you.
Okay, thanks for pointing that out, Craig. So folks, there you have it. To the best of our knowledge, the Cleveland Cavaliers are named for a partisan bunch of 17th century pro-monarchy English ne'er-do-wells, who, and I return to the petition here, stood ready to commit all manner of outrage and violence.
Wow, pretty scandalous stuff. I mean, I don't see how you could possibly support a team that ignores such a problematic legacy.
I know, it's baffling, especially in this day and age. And I hate to say it, Craig, but this is not just ancient history. Disturbingly, the Cleveland Cavaliers still celebrate this troubling past. I mean, I can't help but notice their ongoing covert support, if not for King Charles himself, at least for monarchy in general.
What do you mean, Jamie?
Craig, tell me this. Who's the best player on the Cavaliers?
Well, that's easy. LeBron James.
And his nickname is?
Oh my God.
That's right, folks. King James. You know, King James, King Charles, monarchy, authoritarianism, oppression.
I think I need to sit down.
You're sitting down already, Craig. We're in the studio.
Okay, well, I think I need to lie down then.
Oh, yeah, sure, man. Go ahead. But for those of you who are as shaken right now as Craig is at this anti-democracy group masquerading as a basketball team, you can rest assured that we are still looking for answers here. We've reached out to the Cavaliers front office about these disturbing revelations, but thus far they have refused to comment. Oh, Craig, welcome back. How you feeling? Better?
Yeah, whew. Bit better. Thanks, Jamie. I dunked my head in a bucket of ice water and that seemed to help.
Yeah, good thinking. Well, maybe getting back to the original meaning of the adjective Cavalier will help as well. Once again, nowadays, this word really has nothing to do with horses or monarchy, but rather refers to people who pay insufficient heed to risk and danger. Let's now get some examples of Cavalier in ordinary conversation or writing. Craig, why don't you lead us off?
Okay, here we go. Example number 1. LeBron James was quite cavalier about his... Sorry, let me start that again. LeBron James was quite... I'm sorry, Jamie, I can't do this.
Oh, right. Sorry, man. I really shouldn't have asked you to do that one. Like, what was I thinking? Why don't you, look, we've got another bucket of ice water right over there in the corner. Sort of our backup bucket. Go ahead and, yeah. Okay, so as Craig was saying, and I'm just going to pinch hit here for a sec. Example number 1. LeBron James was quite cavalier about his team's large halftime deficit, so he took a short nap in the locker room before returning to the floor for the second half. Craig, you good?
I think so, thanks, man. Here we go. Example number 2. Ignoring his father's warnings about the risks of running over a sprinkler head, Jay cavalierly mowed the lawn, never bothering to inspect the overgrown grass for potential hazards.
Example number 3 comes from the story The Sign of 4, a Sherlock Holmes mystery by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Here, Sherlock Holmes is explaining to Dr. Watson how he deduced, based merely on a brief observation of Watson's wristwatch, that Watson had a brother who, among other things, was a careless sort of person. Quote, "When you observe the lower part of that watch case, you notice that it is not only dented in 2 places, but it is cut and marked all over from the habit of keeping other hard objects, such as coins or keys, in the same pocket. Surely it is no great feat to assume that a man who treats a 50-guinea watch so cavalierly must be a careless man." Right, so to sum up, Dr. Watson's brother treated his watch cavalierly by failing to properly account for the risks of damaging it by jostling it about in his pocket with various sharp objects. All right then, that I think is sufficient coverage of Cavalier, so that'll do it for this, the inaugural episode of Season 4. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for tuning in. It is great to have you back. It is great to be back. And many thanks to you as well, Craig, for favoring us with your company and your voice once again.
Thank you, Jamie. It's always a pleasure, and I do what I can. I hope this show has given all of you, especially those in Cleveland, a whole new understanding of what it means to be Cavalier, or a Cavalier, or both.
Now, folks, don't forget, if you ever want to get in touch with us, there are myriad ways to do so, including email, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And all these things can be accessed via our website, WOTDpodcast.com. And that is WOTD, as in Word of the Day. For now, this is Jamie Silva on behalf of all of us here at the Word of the Day podcast saying so long. We hope you enjoyed the program, and as always, have a great one.